The Bible says that all of creation declares God's glory. All of creation declare God's glory. And I guess in the week where we have the supermoon, right? Something that happens very, very seldom, but I don't know about you, but it looked like you could look out your front door and reach out and touch the moon. In fact, for a brief second, you probably thought, sending somebody the moon, not that big a deal. It's just right there. And then this week, finally, I know it happens a lot later in Georgia than it does up north, but finally some leaves begin to change and some leaves begin to fall. Our neighbor has a beautiful tree. Monica even noticed it yesterday with red and orange leaves on it now. And the heavens declare God's glory. Creation every day declares God's glory if we're looking for it. If we're looking for it. And most of us stay too busy that we just run through life and run right by all the colorful trees. And I remember we were doing a mission trip up in New Hampshire. And we just happened to time, it was right in peak foliage season up there, which up there they actually have that. It's a time tourists come up there just to see the colors of the trees and stuff as they change up there. And they have peak season and off season and that kind of thing. And we were up there, and I'm not big into that, just to be honest, but I was with some guys who were, and we were riding down the road, and literally the one guy just whipped off the side of the road because he had seen this tree, and it was beautiful, red, orange leaves, just bright red leaves, orange leaves. And the thing that was so awesome about it is there was a pond right in front of it that was just perfectly still. So it became like a mirror. And so there was this beautiful tree reflecting in the pond. Probably one of the biggest, the best pictures, prettiest pictures I've ever seen. And it just brings us back to that always. That usually all you have to do is look around. And it declares God's glory. Well, it's that week again in our lives. There's some traditional powers playing this week in the NFL. And on Thursday, there's some college football in-state rivalries that are playing this week. I know everybody's keyed up for that. There is Black Friday shopping, which now starts on Thursday. So you don't have to wait till 3 o'clock in the morning. Just go Thursday afternoon at 6. Walmart will be open. Many of you are out of school, both teachers and students. Some of you are off work this week. Some of you are ready to head out to the woods and hunt. And by the way, it is Thanksgiving this week. Thanksgiving season. And so what I want to do this week and next, before we jump into the Christmas season, is I want to spend a couple of weeks talking about what it means to be grateful. What it means to be grateful. Now, I understand and I know that thankfulness and thanksgiving and gratefulness are very, very similar. But I believe gratefulness is a little bit deeper. Just like joy is a little bit deeper than just being happy, I think being grateful is a little bit deeper than just being thankful. For instance, I'm thankful to live in the United States, but I'm grateful that we have freedom. See, it's a little bigger picture type of thing. I'm thankful for my wife, but I'm grateful that she's a Christian wife and a Christian mother. I'm thankful for my children, but I'm grateful for the relationship that I have with them. See, it's a little different. It's more of our core values. I thought of this example this week, which is very important to me. I'm thankful for our Board of Education, but I'm really grateful that when my children were there were so many Christian teachers. You see, it's a little bigger picture than just, did they learn how to do math? Did they learn how to read and write and science and those kinds of things? It's a bigger picture type of thing. It really deals more with our core values and who we are and what we believe. And so maybe I'm splitting a few hairs and maybe it's just a semantics thing for you and maybe it won't connect. But I think what we're going to look at today and what Paul writes to us may prove my point for me today. See, we're not naturally grateful people. We aren't. We just aren't. We would like to think we are, but we're not. We have to teach our children how to be thankful, do we not? Lacey, how many times have you said to Grady, now what do you say? Now what do you say? Now what do you say? Now, what do you say? You just want to have a voice recorder, right? Because somebody may hand our child a piece of candy or open the door for them, and we're like, now, what do you say? And most of the time they're like, see ya. I mean, we have to train them. It's not natural for our children to turn around and say thank you. See, most of us are so busy, we're just trying to get to the next grade or the next deal or the next promotion or the next level or the next stage in life. We're just trying to get to the next of whatever. And very seldom do we just sit back and really are not just thankful, but grateful for where we're at. And grateful for God's blessings to us. And we have to even teach our children that. And we have to do it over and over and over. And sometimes you may get to the point of thinking they're never going to get it. Because see, you can teach a child to say thank you. I mean, you can. There's ways to make sure that they'll say thank you. It's a lot deeper issue to get your child to live with a grateful heart. You can make your child say thank you and they not be the least bit thankful of anything. So it's a lot bigger picture. It's a lot harder thing to teach our children. And it's a lot harder thing for us as adults, right? Not just to say, hey, thank you for that, but to really be grateful for that. To be not just thankful for our job, but grateful for our job. To be thankful for our friends, not just be thankful for our friends, but really grateful. To have it in our heart that, man, we really are blessed with those friendships, or we really are blessed with those relationships, or with our church, or we really are blessed. I mean, in the heart issue, not just lip service, but to be grateful for the many blessings that God has given us. So today what I want to talk about is the key aspect to living a life of gratitude. The key aspect to living, if you can do this, you'll be able to live a life of gratitude, and that is this big word called contentment. Contentment. Now, Webster's defines contentment as a state of being happy and or satisfied. A state of being happy and or satisfied. Now there's some myths about being content, and I've heard it all along. In fact, I'll counsel some folks, or I'll do premarital counseling with younger folks, and the things that they're raising, I'm just like, dude, that just isn't the big issue. You're missing the big issue because you're focusing on this little issue and trying to teach them about being content. Here's what being content does not mean. It does not mean that you have to settle for less than the best. To be content does not mean that you have to settle for less than the best. I don't have to sit there and go, well, I'm just going to be content with this fat old body. No. I don't have to sit there and go, well, I just need to be content, so I guess I'll just be content in this awful marriage. No, we don't just settle for less than the best. If there are things that are lesser, we work on those things. We strive on those things. It doesn't mean that to be content in the Lord, that we have to settle for some subpar lifestyle or situation, just thinking, oh, I'm just going to be content. That's not what it means. It does not mean that we have to settle for less than the best. Here's what else it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that our past has to determine our destiny. I've talked with people like that, and they just think because of something they did in the past, I'll just never be any better than this right now because of that. They never look forward. They always look backward. And being content does not mean you have to settle for that. Being content does not mean that something that happened in your past has to chain you down for your future and for your destiny. Also, being content does not mean that God is done writing your story. God is not done writing your story. And you know how I know that? Because you're here today. When God's done writing your story, you will not be here. I might not exactly know where you're going to be, but you will not be here when God is done writing your story. And He's not done with you today. He's not done with you today, regardless of your past, regardless of where you're even at today. He is still writing your story. So I want to talk today about what it does mean to be content. And we're going to look at a guy named Paul, and many of you are familiar with Paul. And we're going to look at the book of Philippians, and many of you are very familiar with that book. A very short book in the New Testament. It's actually a letter that Paul was writing. Now here's what I want you to grasp. Sometimes we don't grasp the whole picture of what's going on or the content of what's going on, and we just read a verse and we think, that isn't that big of a deal. Paul is writing this letter to a group of Christians, okay? So people who had some of the same values that you and I have, okay? People who were trusting their life to Christ, people who were probably making changes in their life. But he was writing them to this place called Philippi. Now, Philippi was a small little place. It wasn't much bigger than Perry by population, but it was a small little place. But it was supposed to be, what I read this weekend studying about it, was supposed to be called the mini Rome. In other words, they wanted it to be like a miniature Rome. I don't know if Perry's supposed to be the mini Atlanta or not. I don't know. But in that day, they wanted Philippi to be a mini Rome, just a reflection of Rome. And so the government ruled there, and everything was set up there. And it only had a population of about 12,000 people. And in that place of 10 or 12,000 people, most of them who were there were slaves. They were slaves or they were peasant farmers who literally were working for military generals and military families who had been given land by the Roman government. So you do a great job or you're getting ready to retire from the army, and so they would grant you and your family this piece of land at Philippi. And so when you got there, you had to have some people to farm the ground and all that, and you weren't going to do it. And so you got these slaves and you got these peasant farmers who would work for you and grow your crops and do all of your kind of stuff. So he's writing this letter to a bunch of slaves. He's writing this letter to a bunch of people who, back then there was no poverty line, but they were living way below the poverty line. These slaves did not have much of anything at all. Now, the generals had much, and the military people probably had nice homes and all of that, but the slaves that were working for them and all of that really didn't have all that. So he's writing this letter to them, and the overall arching theme to the book of Philippians is joy. Joy. And so he's writing this letter to a bunch of people who are working, slaving away. Many of them have this new life in Christ that they're trying to work on, trying to understand, trying to grow in. And he's writing to them about joy. And so part of what he's going to tell them and instruct them and here in Philippians is how to have joy, how to live with joy. And so we're going to look at quite a few verses today, but they're all in the book of Philippians. So you can follow along in your Bible if you want to. They'll be up on the screen behind me. We're going to start reading in Philippians chapter 1, some verses here, and I want you to just sort of follow along. And then we're going to make some points about what does it mean to be content. And again, you have to keep in mind who Paul is writing to, and in just a minute I'm going to tell you where Paul is at while he's writing this letter to them. That may even make more of an impression on us as well. Verse 3 picks up, it says, "Every time I think of you, I give thanks to my God. Whenever I pray, I make my request for all of you with joy. For you have been partners in spreading the good news." We know that phrase there, good news, means the gospel about Christ from the time you first heard it until now. So these people are partnering with him. Again, these people are not rich. These people do not have a lot of material things, and that's going to come into play in just a minute as well. Verse 6 says, "And I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns." Verse 7 picks up. It says, "So it is right that I should feel as I do about all of you, for you have a special place in my heart. You share with me the special favor of God, both in my imprisonment and in defending and confirming the truth of the good news or the gospel. God knows how much I love you and long for you with the tender compassion of Christ Jesus. I pray that your love will overflow more and more, that you will keep on growing in knowledge and understanding. For I want you to understand what really matters, so that you may live pure and blameless lives until the day of Christ's return. May you always be filled with the fruit of your salvation, the righteous character produced in your life by Jesus Christ. For this will bring much glory and praise to God. And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped spread the gospel, or the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. So I want to look real quickly at what does it mean to be content. What does it mean to live a life of being content? Remember, it doesn't mean settling for the less. It doesn't mean our past defines our future. And it doesn't mean that God is done writing our story. So what does it mean? The first thing it means is that we have an understanding that our story is for God's glory. Our story is for God's glory. Now keep in mind here, he's writing this letter to a bunch of slaves, a bunch of hard-working people, a bunch of people that didn't have a lot of stuff. But also keep in mind that he's writing this letter from prison. Now, I know you read this letter, and if you read the whole book of Philippians, you may think he's sitting on the beach drinking a nice cold Coke Zero, but he's not. He's in prison. And I'm not talking about prison with tennis courts and cable TV. I'm talking about prison with chains and guards and swords. And he's there because he's been charged with treason. Treason against the Roman Empire. That isn't just speeding tickets. He's been charged with treason. He's in prison because his treason charge is around the fact that he was spreading the gospel. He was spreading the good news of Christ. And so now he's in prison, charged with treason, which, if found guilty, would bring the penalty of death. And he's writing this letter all about joy. How could Paul have any joy from that position? How could he write to these people who really had nothing going for them about joy? Because Paul understood, and what he's trying to convey to them, he said, I want you to understand what really matters, what's really important, is that it's important that we live a life of contentment. It's important that we understand that our story is for God's glory. Look in verse 11. He says, may you always be filled with the fruit of your salvation, the righteous character produced in your life by Jesus Christ. For this will bring much glory and praise to God. And then he says, this is his story. He says, and I want you to know, in fact, I have a little heading in my Bible, you may as well. It says, Paul's joy that Christ has preached. It says, and I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped spread the gospel. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I'm in chains because of Christ and because of my imprisonment. Get this, folks. Because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speaks God's message without fear. Paul understood that his story was not for his glory. His story was not for his comfort. His story was not for his gain. He understood and was trying to convey to these people that his story, though he is in prison, in chains, charged with treason, which carries a penalty of death, his story is for God's glory. And folks, you can live a life of contentment when you begin to understand that your story is supposed to be for God's glory. You can handle imprisonment if it's for God's glory. You can handle the bad facts that happen in life. You can handle the things that come our way when we understand that our story is for God's glory. Here's the second thing about being content. When we realize that now is only temporary. We can live a life of contentment when we realize that now is only temporary. Now, even if everything is good and great, is only temporary. Now, even if things are going bad, it's only temporary. Regardless of where we are in our life situations, now is only temporary. Verse 20 says, for I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ, whether I live or die. Look at verse 21. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. I'm torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me, but for your sakes, it is better that I continue to live. He understood that now is only temporary. He was able to say, for me to live is Christ, but even if I died, that would be gain. He knew that now was only temporary. We used to sing this song almost as old as the How Great Is Our God song. In fact, it may even be older. But it used to go, better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere. And we used to sing that And I wonder how many of us really believe that or really buy into that it would be better to have one day in front of God and one day in His courts than 1,000 days courtside at a Carolina game. I mean, I just wonder. You know? I mean, I don't know. Every Sunday we see people that go and worship at the altar in stadiums all across this country. So I just wonder. But Paul understood that this was all temporary. Whether he was released from prison, he would continue on with his ministry. Whether he was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death, he would die and go and be with Christ. Whatever it was going to bring him, good or bad, he realized that it was only temporary, which leads me to the third thing about how to live a content life, that heaven is our home. Heaven is our home. He says to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Verse 27 says this in Philippians, again, chapter 1, verse 27. It says, above all, you must live, get this, as citizens of heaven. We must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Then whether I come and see you again or only hear about you, I will know that you're standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the gospel. Heaven is our home. 1 Peter 2:11 says, I warn you as temporary residents or foreigners. Another translation that I really like says, I warn you as aliens to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very soul. And so this is not our final place. This is not the end. For those of us that are believers, heaven is our destiny. Heaven is our home. Heaven is the final place. And when you can understand that, and when you can live a life that understands that now is only temporary, heaven is my home, then we are able to live a life of contentment. Now let me ask you this. Has anybody ever looked at you funny because of your faith? I mean, have you ever sat down at work with your lunch, table full of folks, and you're going to say your blessing, and the people around the table just sort of look at you like, or sometimes they'll be talking, they'll go, oh, he's praying. Have they ever looked at you funny because of your faith? Have you ever had somebody ask you a question and you answer it, and then somebody beside you goes, well, I wouldn't have said that. That ain't how I'd answered it. I would have told them, go get it. I mean, go after them, get back at them. There's no way I would have told them, forgive them and move on. I mean, like, are you crazy? I mean, has anybody ever ask you, are you crazy? For the faith that we live in Christ. You see, we should live a life that is different. Noticeably different, to where when sometimes some people look at us, our co-workers, our family, our neighbors, where they say, are you crazy? And if nobody ever asks you, are you crazy, then maybe there's just not a markable difference in your life and theirs. Maybe there's nothing about what you're doing or how you're living or even your contentment level that looks any different from them. So that's how we can live a life of contentment. And we need to strive for that. But again, it's a much bigger deal than can I just be happy with where I'm at today. It's a core issue in our life, because when we are able to live a life of contentment, there's some things that it produces. There's some fruit that comes in our lives when we're able to be content. And one of those things that happens is peace. You're able to live with peace. There's two things. There's probably three or four, but there's two things that every person wants. The believer and the unbeliever. The person in Perry, Georgia, and the person in New York City. The person, who has a job and the person who doesn't have a job. The person who's perfectly healthy and the person who isn't perfectly healthy. There's two things that every person wants. One of those is hope. Hope. We can endure a lot of stuff if we have hope. We can endure the doctor's call when we have hope. I look around this room and I know that some of you have experienced some of those doctor's calls. Some of you have had conversations with the doctor that did not go well. But you had hope. And it made all the difference in the world. We can endure about anything if we have hope. But the other thing that we all want is peace. Peace. We all want peace in our homes, right? I mean, we get into a rhythm of life. We like that because it creates peace in our home, and we like that. We want peace in our country, right? We don't like seeing protest either way, plus or minus. We don't like watching that. We want peace in our world. We would love to live in a world that didn't have to have wars and battles. I mean, we would love to live. We long for peace in our lives. You know the most stressful part of the holidays? You have a home where 1, 3, 5, 7 people live. They sort of have a rhythm of life, right? And then on Thursday, maybe even Wednesday, 5, 10, 15 other people will come into that house. And all of a sudden, conversations get loud, and all of a sudden, the carpet gets messy, and things get knocked over, and things get broken. All of a sudden, that house that had some peace is going to be very unpeaceful, and that's the most stressful part in our holidays because it breaks up our rhythm. It breaks up what we do. We want to live in peace, and when we are content, we are able to live with peace. Also, when we're content, we're able to grow in love. We're able to grow in love. You see, there's some things that cannot happen when we're not content. And one of the things that can't happen when we're not content is we cannot grow in love. But when we live a life of contentment, we can grow in love. But hear this, love and jealousy cannot grow at the same time. I can't love my neighbor if I'm sitting there every day jealous about his truck or his car or his toys or whatever he has that I don't have. I can't grow in my love for them unless I'm content with where I am, unless I'm content with where I am in my walk with Christ, in my life with Christ. Love and envy cannot grow at the same time. Love and greed cannot grow at the same time. You know, we can't be content and we can't grow in love if all the time we're chasing. And if love is growing in our lives, we will not be dissatisfied. That definition of contentment was a state of being satisfied. Well, when we are content and growing in love, we will be satisfied. The band's getting ready to come up here in just a minute. And as they do, the final thing I want you to think about today in living this life of contentment is when we are content, get this, we can bless others. When we're content, we can bless others. There's a sign of people who live a life of contentment. Dave Ramsey talks about this in all of his financial seminars, and many of you I know have done that curriculum and been to those seminars and stuff. And basically it goes like, here's what Dave Ramsey says. The people that can live a life of contentment, they don't live above their means, right? That's going to create, there's no way that could possibly happen. They don't live at their means, which means you make this much and you spend this much and you just try to keep that balance. He said people that can live a life of contentment live below their means. They take in more than they spend out. And that gap there often creates a space where when you want to bless somebody else, you can do that. Have you ever wanted to bless somebody and you just couldn't do it? Have you ever had somebody come up and you just feel for their story, or you run into them outside and you feel bad for them and you really wish you could help them, but you look in your pockets and there's nothing there? See, when we're able to live below our means, when we're able to live a life of contentment, when those opportunities arise, we're able to bless others. I can tell you, having been involved in going up to Macon and different projects that we've done, both here and throughout the world, when you go to help others, when you go to give to others, there's probably not a greater feeling in the world. I mean, I've been to a few Carolina games, and they were great, but I felt better after I went and served the folks in Macon. I mean, there's some things I like to do. There's some things I wish I had. But I know that, man, when we went to Ecuador and Venezuela and Mexico, and you see some kid walking through the streets in Argentina, I'll never forget this. We would go in our summer, which was their winter, and you see some kid walking through the muddy street. I mean, it's not even a paved street, a muddy street with no shoes. And our pastor, who was leading our team, he just got our folks together and said, all right now, we're taking up some money. for some shoes. Because he wasn't just one kid walking through the street. It was like 100 kids walking through the streets. To them, it just wasn't a possibility to run to Walmart and buy the cheapest pair of tennis shoes. It just wasn't they just couldn't do that. Their family couldn't do that. I don't even know how much money we collected up, but we did that. We went to Walmart and bought about every pair of small tennis shoes we could find. And we went back to that same neighborhood the next day and set up a little shop in a garage. I guess we wish I was better at drawing pictures with you, but just this little makeshift shack, probably the best way to describe it. And we took about 100 pair of tennis shoes in there, and those little kids would come up, not expecting it, obviously, had no idea. Parents had no idea. We didn't like we asked permission. Can we give your kids some shoes? And we sat there all day long, putting shoes on feet to see what fit. And those kids walked out of there, back on those same muddy streets, back to the same shack that they had come from. And I don't mean that derogatory, that's the only way to describe it. But they went there with a new pair of shoes. That some people who at that point in time in their life were content and was able to say, you know what? It's an opportunity for us to bless others. Nothing will change your life short of the gospel of Jesus Christ more than when you help somebody else. But if you're going to live that life, if you're going to do that, if that's going to be your goal, you're going to have to live a life of contentment, because you're going to have to give up on some of the stuff that you really might like to have. You're going to have to save that $100 that you want to go spend on this toy or that toy. You need to put that aside, because somebody's going to come up to you and need some help. You're going to want to help them. So if we want to bless others, we have to live a life of contentment. We have to live a life that helps us understand that now is only temporary. Some of you guys are just living the dream right now. Everything's good about your life. You can't find a negative. But some of you in here are struggling. Some of you are here today because this is your last ditch effort to get an answer to the struggle in your life. You're like, I've tried this, I've tried alcohol, or I've tried drugs, or I've tried sex, or I've tried stuff, or I'm going to go give Jesus a try. So my question for you is twofold. One, are you content? And I think most of us, if we're honest, would probably have to say no. Second question would be, do you want to live a life of contentment? Begin to make those changes in your life that open the door for you to live a life of peace, to be able to grow in love with your neighbor and your coworker and those around you, and be able to bless others in the name of God, in the name of Christ, in the name of the gospel. I want to encourage you this week to read the book of Philippians. 4 short chapters. Even for those of us who don't like to read, you can read it. But just read through that book, and just as you read it, just remember he's sitting in prison, not on the beach. He's writing to a bunch of slaves and hard-working people, not the wealthy, not the rich. And then look around at your life and read the book of Philippians. The second thing I want to encourage you to do is this week, write a letter, an email, a card, or a phone call to someone. Not that you're thankful for, that you're grateful for. Not just say, hey, thank you, but to say, I'm grateful. Maybe for your relationship. I'm grateful for the way you were a role model. I'm grateful for the character that you installed in me. Those bigger picture things in our life. I'm going to encourage you to do that this week. And to deliver that, or mail it, or send it, or make that call. And just let somebody know, now I'm not just thankful for you, I'm grateful for you. Let's pray.